hey, I do hope that that things are going well for you and yours. Talking politics now with Dr. Bryce Edwards. Bryce, kia ora, good morning. Thanks for your day today. Thanks for your time, I should say.
Morena, Andrew.
Sorry, get my words straight on this one. Now, kicking things off with polls, of course, the budget announcement and some protests in response to that. We've had some protests since then. More on that in just a moment. But I suppose these latest polls give an indication of what we all thought of the budget, perhaps.
Yes, so the Taxpayers Union commission a poll each month or so by Curia Research, and it showed that National had gone down a bit, just slightly, down I think it was about it was 2 points that had gone down, actually.
Okay.
And so normally, of course, governments expect after distributing the lollies at a budget that they'll be impressed. But of course, this year's budget, it wasn't too unimpressive, but there wasn't anything too exciting in it. But then there was all this debacle over the cancer drugs that had been promised that turned out not to be in the budget. And I think that would definitely be, part of National's fall in this poll. But just quickly, there wasn't a lot of other movement in the poll. Labour also down a bit. Greens up about 2 points. So National was the loser, Greens the winner. Those other minor parties still bobbling around 5 to 9%.
Something which I did think was
a huge change.
Something which I thought was particularly interesting with the poll results is it's the one of the better poll results for Chris Hipkins recently. A bit of a bump for him. That's surprising, perhaps.
Well, we had in this poll for the preferred Prime Minister, we had Luxon on 25% and Chris Hipkins on 20%. So Luxon's still ahead there, but they also measure people's negative and positive orientations to the leaders. And on that, Luxon was in negative territory, whereas Hipkins had gone up to positive 3%. So, he's doing well. He's impressing a lot of people, it seems.
And I'm not sure he's done anything particularly prime ministerial or in the most recent while, but again, it might be Luxon's done worse than him. With some of the handling of particular protests. And wanting to talk about this because there was the Budget Day protest, but then there was significant protests to do with climate change in particular, although I must note multiple flags. There was a few Tino Rangatira flags in there. I think I spotted a Palestinian flag or two and perhaps even some trans-activist flags. However, generally the theme pushing back against the impact on the climate of this the fast-track bill. Again, the signs of pushback on the government here.
Yeah, so this was the march down Queen Street in Auckland on Saturday, the March for Nature. It was called by, I think, Greenpeace and Forest and Bird, and it's a bit hard to get any sort of clear numbers on it. I saw some news reports that it was a few thousand. The organisers were claiming 20,000, and I saw some other reports of it being even more than that. It was a significant march, perhaps not as big as some of us might have been expecting, and it was very much firmly focused by those two environmental organisations to complain about the fast track bill, which I think does need a lot of scrutiny at the moment, and I can understand why environmental groups have major concerns about that. But yes, it's interesting that you noted that I guess some other groups had also wanted to air their grievances over kind of completely different issues, especially around the treaty and around what's happening in the Middle East in Gaza. And so I think sometimes that can be a bad look when you've got multiple different issues that aren't actually that connected.
A group of people angry at the government, although not necessarily on message, and to be fair. And hey, maybe what we saw in terms of flags reflected what we saw in the polls as well. On to, today's the first day of Field Days. Have you ever been to Field Days show, Bryce?
Look, I haven't. I've got other family members that have been, and I do want to go one day. So yes, Mystery Creek in the Waikato. next 4 days.
Yeah.
And it's not a heavily political event, of course, but everything's political. And of course, we're going to have a lot of people from rural New Zealand, from the agricultural industry there. So of course, politicians do turn
Exactly, and
from all
especially
sides of politics.
but especially with a national-led government. Exactly. I think it might be worth breaking out your red bands for next year, Bryce, because you're certainly going to be a little bit of politics there, because I have noticed, and perhaps no surprises with a national-led government, some pro-farming and pro-forestry policies have been, put forward or at least hinted at by the current government?
Well, the issue of climate change and how New Zealand deals with its methane emissions in particular is just a huge ongoing issues that all governments, all political parties are grappling with. The last government put together this multi-party group, Hiwaka Eka Noa, and that involved, lots of different groups. I think we're seeing now that the new government is officially cancelling that, and they've coincided the announcement of that with field days, because I think farmers are going to receive that news well.
Yep.
It's a bit more complicated than the government just not caring about climate. They're still signing up to the Zero Climate Act, and they're still saying that farmers will need to find a way to reduce their emissions.
Yep.
But they're taking a more softly approach to farmers on that, which, of course, climate change advocates or campaigners aren't very happy about. But I think we're still seeing that National does want to deal with this issue, but they've also announced a lot of subsidies for farmers to try and progress some of the technologies that might reduce cow burps and farts and so forth.
That sort of thing,
And so farmers are quite excited, or at least some are, about that.
And hey, it's a step in a positive direction towards making some change rather than just penalising farmers that are doing what they can with what they've got, I suppose. The other thing, which is climate related, is pro-forestry policies. I know, look, after the last big cyclone, a lot of concern and a bit of pushback against how large forestry organisations are basically getting a look the other way from the government because of how important it is to the economy, and yet the impact of slash wrecking bridges and communities. A lot of concern last year. I know particularly people with an environmental concern will be worried about whether there's going to be too many concessions for the forestry industry from the current government.
Well, we do need forestry. We badly need it as a form of economic activity to, because we need wood, and we need to export wood to, make the country work, to get our income. And we also need it for in terms of climate change, for essentially sucking up some of those emissions. But yes, there's huge problems with forestry as well, if it's done in a bad way. And there's lots of debate, especially in the climate change area, about to what extent this is a real solution to climate change. So those debates are going to keep going on, but the government's certainly wanting to help the industry. And it's going to be an ongoing issue of contention, I think.
Certainly, if we see some growth in this industry, pun intended, that may be a better outlook for our, I suppose, broadly economic balance of payments, etc. Wanting to get your comments on what's happening internationally, because Prime Minister just returned from a trip to the Pacific, but on a bigger stage, a important summit happening in Switzerland. This and hey, the who's who of the world essentially going to this one. This is to do with the war in Ukraine and some concerns about who we're sending as a country, who is going to be New Zealand's representative at this important international summit. I must say the announcement is a bit underwhelming, Bryce. Is that harsh?
Yeah, no, it's not too harsh. I mean, Ukraine has sort of fallen off the radar for a lot of us in the last 6 months or so. But, that war is still going on, and there's concerns that if there's a change of president in the US later this year, that there's a possibility that the US will pull out of its strong support for Ukraine. And so I think there's an international sort of coalition wanting to raise the debate on what to do about ending the Ukraine war. So yes, New Zealand is sending Mark Mitchell. So I'm not quite sure why he's going, because he's not the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He's not the Minister of Defence. He's the Minister for Police.
Yeah.
But of course he was formerly Defence Minister in the last government. So he's not exactly a big star to send, but I'm sure he'll still do New Zealand proud in those negotiations.
I'm sure he'll get some Toblerone on his duty free. That's one thing I'm sure of. Although that the Deputy Prime Minister and Winston Peters isn't going, that one surprises me, given his interest in New Zealand's relationship with Europe and with NATO. This would be a golden opportunity for him, I would have thought.
Oh, look, I think so too. Winston Peters has been keen to go and, press the flesh around, but, maybe he needs some time at home. I don't know. You would have also thought that Judith Collins, as Minister of Defence, would be the likely person to go. But yeah, it is a bit strange. Maybe it's just Mark Mitchell's time, his turn to go on a trip.
Exactly, or even the Prime Minister. Certainly this is it's not quite a heads of government meeting, but almost is. And, sorry, Mark Mitchell, but who we are sending may also send a bit of a signal in that regard. Bryce, always appreciate your comment and your insight. Maybe next year for the Red Band Gumboots at Field Days, perhaps.
Yes.
What do you think?
I'd love to go.
We might see you there.
I'll wait for my invite and my boots to arrive.
Sounds good. Talk to you next time.
Cheers. Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.